Hello, this is Professor Bustillo-Booth, and in this video tutorial, we'll walk through how to solve ethical dilemmas in customer service. And let's first talk about what ethics really is. So ethics is a set of moral principles that govern our behavior, and morality here is about what's right and wrong. And those are typically socially constructed through within our community. So over time, as we engage with others, we learn what that community deems as right and wrong, and what is good or bad in human character. And then we're socialized to understand what these are, and they are reinforced through our engagement and how we are with others. So in an organization, ethics can be expressed in its value system, in its statements, in its customer service manual or employee manual, that sort of thing, or plaques that are up against the wall to talk about what kind of company it intends to be. Now, whether we have come to be socialized to learn what is right and wrong, or these are clearly written in documents, oftentimes ethical principles are within a spectrum, and there's a lot of gray there, and that we will need to exercise our judgment so that we can determine when we have crossed the line, from good to bad, or what we consider as acceptable and not acceptable. And avoid situations where we have unhappy employees, unhappy customers, and then be in a place where we are losing customers and putting the company's financial future at risk. So let's try to avoid that. We are now going to discuss an ethical dilemma and then deconstruct it so that we can identify ways forward to begin to solve the problem. This ethical dilemma is in your book, Customer Service, the 6th edition by Robert W. Lucas. And I'll just go ahead and read it here so we have a baseline to discuss. Assume that your organizational philosophy states in part that your purpose is to, quote, to provide quality products at a competitive price in a low pressure customer atmosphere. Note that that is in quotes, so that is actually written somewhere, right? Either whether it's in the customer service manual or written up on the website. At any rate, this is somewhere for employees to see, the customers to see, or both. Even so, your supervisor establishes a goal that requires you to have a certain number of sales per shift as an outbound sales representative. Based on your research, however, this number is 2 more than the typical industry average for a salesperson during a work shift. Now, you recognize that to achieve this goal, you will have to be more persuasive than you usually are when dealing with customers, or that you feel comfortable in doing. There are at least 4 questions to ask to begin to take this apart. So one is to identify the ethical issues in the situation and to understand how the situation will impact service delivery and what this situation might have, how it might affect your performance, and then how this situation might be addressed. So given that there is a service philosophy to provide quality products at competitive price in a low pressure environment or atmosphere, the supervisor has created an awkward situation where there is the service philosophy and then the delivery of that service philosophy. There is now quite a bit of distance between those two, and the employees are now faced with having to resolve that. And so what may be broken or at risk of being broken is the trust that the company has established between not only its internal customers, which is its employees, vendors, and the like, and its external customers, but between internal customers themselves. So that would be the supervisor and the employees. Of course, this discrepancy between the promise of providing quality products at a competitive price in a low pressure atmosphere and the new expectation to do the same, except now at a high pressure atmosphere, will create service delivery tension. And so we'll begin to see employees that may be rushing through the customer service delivery, customers feeling pressured to buy things that they do not want. And then it will basically kind of run through the company, because it's not just the engagement at the time, the exchange between the seller and the buyer, but also after sales. So while customers may feel compelled at the moment to buy something, they may come home and have buyer's remorse and then say, I really didn't want this product. And then we'll come back to return. And then there will be those at the counter who may feel pressured to somehow encourage these customers to keep the product when in fact they didn't want them in the first place. And so there will be greater dissatisfaction, of course, and in today's world where people can project and telegraph their experience through reviews, more of this may come out. And so as other customers who may be interested in the product or the service learn about how things may be going on in there, and they discover statements like, this used to be a great place to shop, and they said that, they would take care of us in a low pressure environment, but once you get through the doors, it's not that way at all. People will tend to then say, what, they're not where, we don't want that experience, so we'll go elsewhere. Not only will external relationships be damaged, there are also the concern of internal relationships. Again, we have internal customers as well as external customers, but this really was rooted internally, right? Because the policy said one thing and then the expectation is another. And so employees will begin to feel like this is a no-win situation, and distrust will begin to deepen. And how this might manifest itself in a day-to-day situation is that people might start to come into work late. They may come, call in sick, or they will just find other things, other reasons to not be on the sales floor. And so it really has a very negative impact and a counterproductive effect. Say one thing and expect another. We need to address that situation in order to make sure that it doesn't fester and or affect the company's bottom line. So how can we solve this problem? We'll take this apart in two perspectives. One is what the supervisor can do, because some of you will find yourself in the position of management, and then also how to address this problem from the employee perspective. So from the supervisor perspective, it is important to take a look at the mission statement or the philosophy that's been established and to come up with realistic expectations. I know that seems simple to say that, but it is important to stop and think about what it is really we have committed to. If we wrote this down, do we really believe in this service philosophy, or do we need to change it? And if we are going to change it, then we're going to need buy-in from the very people who are expected to deliver the service philosophy, because they're the frontline folks and they're the ones engaging the customers. From an employee perspective, it's important to understand that you are not completely powerless and that there are certain mechanisms that you can pursue in order to help solve this problem, instead of falling into distress or a sense of hopelessness and or resorting to things like absenteeism, because there's a lot of things that could be happening that you might not know about. So for example, the supervisor may be feeling a lot of pressure from above to increase sales beyond what you have been used to, and but we don't know why that is. So it'll be important to engage a supervisor in sort of in a diagnostic way, like to figure out why this might be happening, and then to begin to problem solve with the internal folks that are affected so that it doesn't bleed into the external customers where the effect may be long lasting and that will impact the company's bottom line. So we'll go into specifics on how to address both of these from the supervisor end as well as from the employee end. From the supervisor end, it'll be important to benchmark the target numbers, in this case, the sales quotas. And so to start researching the industry expectations, that would be one. Just try to understand what actually is realistic, because you want to have a target that you can actually achieve. And the second thing that can occur, or that should be pursued by the supervisor, is to really kind of look at the company's internal resources and say, must all of this come from the front line? So let's say if you're trying to increase sales by 40% by a certain period of time, must all of this be accomplished by the frontline people? And so, for example, in the company, there might be a marketing department that can be tasked to increase its own strategies so that we can increase the number of customers that'll come through the doors, right? So there are ways to kind of take a look at how to solve this problem so that you can maintain the service philosophy, and also tap into the internal resources so that you can deliver at a higher performance. Now, from the employee side of things, let's say that the supervisor is not necessarily has time, or for whatever reason, it's not benchmarking, it's not looking at the internal resources of the company. It would be good, right, to self-empower yourself to think of those very similar things. So before you go to the supervisor, you could do some research as to what is a reasonable number from that's expected of the industry, and then to begin to problem solve, and not in a blaming way, but to say, look, we see that there is pressure for the company to perform at a higher level. Maybe it is a life or death situation for the company, and people will have to be creative. And so the ways in which things have been done in the past may not be delivering and in a sustainable manner. And so the company's competitiveness in the market is now at risk. And so it might help to take a look at, okay, so what else can we do here in the company? You don't necessarily have to solve the problem right there and then and bring it up to the supervisor, but begin to think of it outside of the present conditions and say, all right, what else might be happening? What have other companies have done, and then also to figure out what kinds of resources we need to come into play, or some creative means to come up with some solutions, right? So now what we're going to do is take a look at the what a SMART goal looks like. And it is important for both managers and employees to be familiar with this approach to setting goals so that your likelihood of success increases. Studies have shown that when organizations put together a certain kind of goal or set of goals, people will tend to achieve them. So we'll use the SMART acronym to discuss this kind of specific goal. So S stands for specific versus, say, general. You want to be very specific. And that should be measurable. And measurable means that it is a number, it is a percentage, or it could even be a time. Something you can kind of wrap your arms around and say, that is something I can measure, right? And that the A is that it is achievable, and this is very important, and attainable. So A in this case could be either the word achievable or attainable. And that the R stands for relevant, meaning that this is relevant to the organization. So, what the organization is about, what it hopes to accomplish. So it's not just any old goal, but something that ties directly to, say, the company's mission statement, or in this case, service philosophy. And that it be time bound so that we know when that goal ought to have been met, right? So that's what SMART stands for. So in the case of this particular situation or dilemma, both the supervisor and the employee can think of it in terms of coming up with goals that are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. In this case, a SMART goal might look like increase sales by 25%. And the assumption here is that some industry benchmarking has occurred and that this number then is achievable and attainable. And while maintaining low pressure customer atmosphere, right? So this is relevant to the customer service philosophy by the end of June 2018. And that June 2018 is also in the realm of it being achievable. So in this case, all of this together would be achievable. From the supervisor's end, it may be that after the supervisor has done some industry benchmarking, he or she will find that the increase in sales is reasonable. However, the current skill sets of the employees may not be able to deliver on that. This would be a time to sort of slow down the train and establish an internal SMART goal to prepare the employees to be able to deliver on that expectation, because it's really not fair to expect people to perform at certain levels if they have not been prepared or equipped or have the capacity to deliver on that set of expectations. So the supervisor in this case could establish some SMART goals around training, that the employee learns certain skills and certain number of skills by a certain time. And there are some evaluation methods to make sure that people are progressively learning those skills. The supervisor may also find out that this is unreasonable to expect the employees to deliver on that particular increase in sales. And so the supervisor may have to look internally and its other resources to see where else can this be improved so that the sales do increase. And it may be working with the marketing department and say, hey, we need to have some very specific promotional objectives, this number of customers who are coming in through our doors, and we believe that is attainable because this is what the industry says we expect this to occur, because so-and-so company that is like ours is actually performing at that level, and so we can too. And then so there can be an internal discussion as to how to improve the internal capacity so that customers can come through the door and we're not trying to extract sales from one person or a few customers, but we're really trying to increase our customer base so that we can increase our overall sales. A SMART goal that taps marketing resources then might look something like this. Increased number of customers by 25%. So we're being specific at what it is we're trying to increase by a certain number that has also been validated through industry analysis, and that it is attainable. Using low pressure marketing strategies, again, it remains relevant. Make sure that the strategies being used are still in keeping with our service delivery philosophy by the end of June 2018. So in this case, the SMART goal orients the internal players to deliver on the service delivery without creating an ethical dilemma. Now, from the employee perspective, the same thing can happen. If the culture actually allows for that level of empowerment for employees to problem solve, an employee can reach out having done some research, and it's important to do that, right? So that an employee can demonstrate their interest and commitment to the company. They can also do some research and then go to the supervisor and engage into some problem solving. So one, it's always important to begin, say, if I were the employee, I might say, I see that we have had a change in policy, and I'd like to understand a little bit more why that might be. Can you tell me more? That engages the supervisor to kind of give you some backdrop as to why this might be happening, right? And so now we have a dialogue, and that's really important. And as you go to the diagnostic sense of it, which is the learning of the problem, identifying, what is driving this new policy, then you can, begin to introduce ideas. Say, I see. Well, how about we sit down together and try to figure out how we can, develop our capacity, increase our ability to meet those sales, and maybe engage, say, our marketing resources, and or take a look at our customer loyalty policies, that sort of thing, so that we can maintain our service philosophy to offer quality products at a competitive price and a low pressure environment. I mean, you may still be able to maintain that while you increase sales by pursuing strategies that are not necessarily high pressure, right? And so a lot of this really has to be solved internally first before it is experienced by the external customers, and then they're confused as to why the company has all of a sudden pivoted their service philosophy, right? So it really does behoove the company to start internally to solve these ethical dilemmas, because we do not expect the customers to solve it for us. We, as a customer service delivery representatives and professionals, are expected to make sure we understand what the discrepancies might be, and we have an obligation to make sure that we realign ourselves to our service philosophy. Now, there are situations where ethical dilemmas are not easily resolved. And as service professionals, we have some internal reflection to do. And we may have to consider whether or not we can continue to work in conditions where our moral standards are not in alignment with the place where we work. Regardless of what may be occurring, it is important to remain professional and maintain our calm. Now, at the end of the day, the customer will let us know how they'll resolve that dilemma for us. And they may go ahead and seek other services to satisfy their wants and needs. It is important to understand that we always have choices, whether it's internal customers are concerned and how we dialogue through the resolution or the understanding of ethical dilemmas, and then also how an understanding of how the customer will ultimately experience that ethical dilemma and what our responsibility is to resolve that tension. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this was helpful, and we'll talk again soon.